Today on RoxomTV News, first Elon Musk floats buying Ryanair because apparently airline mergers now start as Twitter polls. Plus, the Greenland standoff escalates with tariffs, NATO nerves, and a fight that's starting to look a lot bigger than an island. But first, President Trump unveils a new board of peace for Gaza with a guest list that's already making allies uneasy. All that and more on today's show. Let's get into it. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome back to another episode here of RoxomTV News. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. Today, we're starting off in Washington and then going to the Middle East, as new diplomatic proposal is already stirring unease among U.S. allies. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced the creation of what he calls a Board of Peace, an international body intended to oversee the Gaza ceasefire and shape the territory's post-war future. According to U.S. officials, the board would supervise security, reconstruction, and governance during a transitional period following the war between Israel and Hamas. Now, the initiative has drawn immediate attention because it operates outside traditional United Nations frameworks and would be chaired directly by Trump himself. Several countries have confirmed receiving invitations, including Israel, Britain, France, Canada, and Saudi Arabia. Even Russian President Vladimir Putin was invited, a move that has raised alarm among U.S. allies as the war in Ukraine continues on. Critics argue that including Putin in a global peace body risks legitimizing Moscow while reinforcing perceptions that Trump favors the Russian leader. France has reiterated its commitment to the UN Charter and warned against bypassing established multilateral institutions. Israel confirmed it was invited, but has expressed unease about the board's structure and the inclusion of Turkey and Qatar on the subordinate committees, citing their past ties to Hamas. Now, the board's mandate would extend beyond Gaza, granting itself authority to intervene in other global conflicts deemed to threaten international stability. Trump would serve as chairman with sweeping powers, including appointing an executive board, vetoing decisions, issuing binding directives, and naming his own successor. Countries seeking permanent membership would also be required to pay more than $1 billion, a provision diplomats say reinforces concerns about American dominance. Supporters inside the administration argue the board would be more nimble and effective than existing institutions. Critics warn it concentrates extraordinary authority in one leader and risks undermining international norms. Now, for viewers at home, this matters because Gaza's future remains unresolved, ceasefire talks are fragile, and this proposal could reshape how global conflicts are managed well beyond the Middle East. All right, we're moving on to our next story here this morning that's taking place in Minnesota as a legal fight over immigration enforcement is escalating into a broader constitutional clash. The Trump administration has appealed a federal court order that restricts how immigration and customs enforcement agents can operate during raids in the Minneapolis area. Now, the appeal, filed by the Department of Justice, challenges a ruling that barred ICE agents from arresting or detaining peaceful protesters and bystanders. The order also prohibited the use of crowd control weapons, such as tear gas and pepper spray, against observers. The ruling followed a lawsuit from protesters and civil rights monitors who said their constitutional rights were violated during recent enforcement actions. Tensions have surged since the fatal shooting of Minneapolis resident by an ICE agent last month, an incident that sparked days of protests. The administration responded by deploying thousands of federal immigration officers as part of an expanded deportation campaign. One of the most controversial incidents occurred during a pre-dawn raid in which ICE agents forced entry into a home without a warrant. A man was pulled outside wearing only underwear in freezing temperatures as neighbors honked and shouted in protest. Here is a bystander video from that very incident. Let's take a look.
ラは本当の自分が何者か分かってない。
Now, Minnesota officials accuse federal agents of unlawful conduct, racial profiling, and intimidation. The city's mayor and the state attorney general have sought court intervention to rein in enforcement tactics. The judge's order allows agents to act only when there is reasonable suspicion of criminal interference. And administration lawyers argue those limits undermine federal authority and put officers at risk. The case now moves to an appeals court as protests continue and scrutiny intensifies. Now, for those of you at home, this matters because it tests where federal powers end, where constitutional protections begin, and how far immigration enforcement can go inside of American cities. All right, joining us this morning to talk about this story and others, the man who can connect the dots like no one else, RoxomTV's own Nolan Bowerly. Nolan, welcome to the show. Happy Tuesday. How are you?
Love life. I'm enthusiastic about the future of America, of humanity, of Bitcoin. Add it to the list. We're doing great.
Oh, I love to hear it, Nolan. So I want to get your first take on this. What's going on currently in Minneapolis with ICE and Trump kind of trying to make sure they can do whatever they want to the protesters right now. What's your initial beat on this newest news coming out of Minnesota?
Well, in that story, I think it's only going to give Trump even more of a hand, more sway, because I covered that one on my show as well this morning. And the fella they took out of there, did you know who else was in the house? Why it was done?
No.
Oh,
No.
a pedophile and a
Do
sex. Yeah, it was a pedophile that was in the house, and so
Okay.
he was
You can yank him out
defending.
without clothes. I'm fine with that.
Exactly. So that was the issue. Is that fellow was American, and everyone supporting him probably wouldn't have supported him had they known the full story. So there were two people that he was harboring in the house. Now, tons of misinformation out on the internet, but that's what I saw, and that was the way I covered that story this summer. This morning on my show. So, no, but legal ramifications are around, right? We saw as well, Harmeet Dillon is going to be prosecuting Don Lemon. Don Lemon went into a church on Sunday and both said before he was going and after that he was tried to backtrack and said, oh, protesting is supposed to be uncomfortable, except according to, weirdly, the KKK FACE Act, I guess it was called, where you're not supposed to influence people. So it started with the KKK that were threatening people years ago going to church. That's where the law comes from. It was extended into anti-abortion protesting. So if you went outside of a abortion clinic and really did a lot of proselytizing and stopped people from accessing it, that same law grew to encompass sort of both sides. And so there is let's call it a suspension of the right to speech, the freedom of speech, in the U.S. Constitution. When it comes to physically harassing people going to access different services, that doesn't count as speech. That counts as something else and is prosecutable. So Don Lemon likely going to be. Now, one of the issues here that I've had from the very beginning, particularly with respects to Trump, is that you don't want to get in a position where people who, like myself, would normally be fine, many other people would be the same, normally fine to criticize Trump about going into places warrantless, and no one, I think, not a lot of Republicans want to see that. However, you create a predicate for it. You create a predicate for people to support Trump, even though everyone can see that there are things that we don't like here, but it's the dishonesty of supporting a guy in his underwear when that guy, you got to kind of have the other side of the story about who he was defending.
Sure. Yeah.
Just like you got to see the Don Lemon part. So again, we're never in a good place as a country if people are defending Trump in a way that gives Trump more latitude. But many people are out there saying today, well, what other choice do we have? We can't let this go on. We can't let this continue. So I think it all leads to more support for Trump. And, I've been in that boat from the very beginning when it comes to Trump. I like a lot of the stuff Trump does. I like a lot of stuff he doesn't. I don't have to like all of it. But when when people are constantly asked to defend everything, and so much of the context gets distorted, you end up defending Trump even when it seems unreasonable because it's not really a properly framed question. So that's what I
Hmm.
saw with that story in Minneapolis, and that's what I see with a lot of these stories in Minneapolis. And I think that the picture,
Yeah, this good.
just like you saw a lot of
No,
people
please.
rushing to condemn Trump over the ICE story originally, the pictures of those kids in the church are having the reverse effect. It's causing a lot of people to say, "Okay,
Hmm.
Trump, you got to go do it." So you don't want this stuff litigated in the court of popular opinion, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, no, this story just seemingly has more and more chapters to it. And one we discussed yesterday that I would love to get your 2 cents of was also Trump kind of threatening to deploy federal troops to Minnesota. I think he had like 1,500 on standby. And we were talking about that story yesterday, and I felt like that could be in place for a couple of reasons, but I'd be curious before I get into it, what were your thoughts when you heard that about him threatening federal troops being positioned into Minnesota? Because I thought that would have been a pretty severe step, but I'd love to get your take first.
I think we're watching a WWF lead up to WrestleMania, and WrestleMania is the Insurrection Act and troops going in. You're seeing the interviews, you're seeing the staging, you're seeing the hype machine go. Trump has likely been on this for a couple of years now, and I'd say all the way back to the George Floyd time, Trump has been setting the stage for many Americans to want Trump to pull the trigger on the Insurrection Act. So I would say a lot of Trump supporters are anticipating this. They want it. They want it done today. You've heard the mayor or the governor of Minnesota say, don't be violent because Trump is going to do this because he wants to do this. So, yeah,
Hmm.
indeed. I think that what you saw, even going back last year to DC, when Trump federalized DC using the National Guard, I think he's been suggesting that's going to be a national plan for a long time. And I would say take him at his word for it. I'd say you're watching the hype machine crank up for this inevitability. There are a lot of people out there who want this. There's a lot of people, I'm in many ways, look, I'm myself a New York City refugee. When the George Floyd thing happened in Brooklyn in 2020, it became very, very difficult to navigate the city. The police would just tell you, we're
Hmm.
not coming. Like, forget it. You're on your own. And so there
Yeah.
was a lot of people who felt abandoned at that time. And so I think this is inevitable. Now, it's not my personal preferred way, but I think you're going to have a lot of people who want this. And again, you're not going to have the narrative cover to oppose it because I mean, it's been a long time that even Tim Walz is warning about this inevitability. So I think it's coming. I think you're seeing the pitched battles, you're seeing the kayfabe, you're seeing the wrestling drama pump up and amplify, and it looks like that is where we're headed. Insurrection Act, almost an inevitability in America.
Yeah, and I've got a take on this, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts because this worries me a lot because I feel like Trump wants to do it because, these federal enforcements are not the same as like civilian police officers, right? Like these people are equipped to fight in war, which is a very different thing than handling civilians from your own country. And I worry that you send in all these federal troops, they're going to be coming in smashing, pointing, like just with a very different level of respect for the population than local,
Discretion.
police would have. Right. And then naturally, you're going to see pushback against that type of force. And I think it's going to exacerbate this situation even further, which is then going to add even more fuel to Trump's fire. He's like, look, listen, I sent federal troops to Minnesota. Look what happened there. And I feel like he's just trying to get power where he can do this wherever he wants. And he's ultimately going to be instigating and inflaming this situation even further so that he can do it whenever. What is your thoughts on that? Because I know you always have a great take, so I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. So what you're saying is the slippery slope, let's say, right? So if this goes in this direction, what's the counterforce? So the
Mm-hmm.
counterforce, I think, is in the beauty of the American system and the decentralized system that is the U.S. states, and why I continue to believe the framework where this is all headed back is a realignment with state level sovereignty. Trump can only do this when different states don't really live up to their standards, because there's people in Minnesota who cheer them on, right? There's as many videos of folks cheering ICE
Sure.
on as there are of videos saying no. So America is divided. It's a narrative division. How this
Yeah.
narrative is prosecuted is the main part of the story. So what you're going to see are various red states saying, look, we have no problem. We can handle our own coordination with ICE. The idea, for example, that you could have sanctuary cities, right? There was a lot of sort of branding of sanctuary cities, but is there really a legal predicate to do that? I'm not sure. There's not really a very powerful constitutional role of cities. So what right do they really have to decide which federal laws they follow and which don't? States can, which is why states are going to have to rein in their cities in ways that make the federal government satisfied. So the counterforce to what you're saying, right? So the reason why I don't believe it's a slippery slope that's just going to wipe its way across the entire country and turn everything into martial law across the land. I think you're going to have specific acts of martial law. You're going to have various states that are not a part of it because they've already shown their ability to align with federal rules to manage their cities. And so I do think you're going to have the various states, almost like a checklist, if you will, that there will be certain things a state like Minnesota can do to get the federal government out of the game. California will have the same. One of them, very likely, Trump will actually say that all you have to do is go with same day voting, get rid of no voter ID cards, because that's where a lot of this stuff is happening and where a lot of the corruption is tied to the no voter ID laws. All of these states are the same, right? So I think he's going to declare insurrection in the states that don't have voter ID laws, inevitably to get voter ID laws in place, because I don't think Trump has much to worry about winning 2026 as long as there are voter ID laws in place throughout those blue states. I think he can win California with voter ID laws. Believe it or not, I know that sounds crazy, but I believe Trump wins California with voter ID laws. So when you look at what's happening in Minnesota and insurrection act across the country, to me, the counterforce is going to be state sovereignty. States are going to have to, Trump will say, what are the parameters that I'll get the insurrection act off of your state and remove federal forces? But it is going to be a kind of alignment test. And I do believe a big part of it will be the thing. And I can tell you it's happening already, because Virginia today, Virginia's first act since it now the Spenbergler or whatever her name is, the new governor, she did three things yesterday. She said, I want I mandate voting machines. So it's a mandatory now, voting machines to count the votes.
Okay.
And as well, they're going to be doing the at-home Somalia play for Minnesota for the money for giving care at home. So they're doing the effectively the fraud play all over again that we saw in Somalia. Those are her first two orders of business. So I think Trump's going to go after Virginia first. Believe it or not, he's already close by, and I think Virginia will be the first case, along with Minnesota, of these Insurrection Act issues. Again, there's a lot of people who have been waiting for many years for Trump to pull the Insurrection Act, so he will have support for it.
So this was something you feel was always, people were waiting for, was in the works. What gives you that impression that people were expecting Trump to do this at some point? It sounds like that was the case, no?
Well, I mean, have you ever heard any of the Q stuff? Have you ever heard of Q before? Q plus, Q? No?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm super familiar.
Yeah, you don't need to be, but just know that it exists. And in that worldview, Trump was recruited by the military in order to reassert civilian control. Q has their worldview is that we haven't had civilian control of the U.S. government since at least Kennedy's assassination, and that you needed to counter the years of brainwashing, for lack of a better word, that the American mind had been so thoroughly steeped in three-act plays, and you needed a character to emerge doing what I said about kayfabe to induce the American population, not by telling them what's going on, but by having them realize on their own what's going on and having them drawn into the narrative and the story of some foreign, dark, opaque power controlling the country. And the only way out of it is to declare the Insurrection Act. So the world of Q has always believed that Trump inevitably, at one point in his trajectory, will declare martial law and insurrection act, and you will see mass arrests of all kinds of corrupt characters. So that is the narrative, and all of that community, it doesn't matter if you believe Q or not or whatever, that world of Q 100% expects insurrection act. In fact, whenever Trump mentions it, they say, oh, right on schedule. That's what's happening. And so that whole world believes this. Yes.
Very interesting. Are they placing these bets on a poly market or something? I wasn't aware of this. I got to get into this
many.
inside
Yeah,
info
yeah,
on Q
yeah.
so I
Many
can
are.
dive in, man.
Many are. Yeah, yeah. Many are. Many are.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Got to get those
You're not going to
prediction
front
markets.
run
All right, we're going to
Q.
move on to... You're not going to front run Q? All right, fine. All right, moving on to our next story here, Nolan, because inside Iran, a digital blackout is turning into an economic chokehold. Iran's nationwide internet shutdown is now nearing 2 weeks following the government's violent crackdown on protests that spread across the country earlier this month. Authorities cut access on January 8th, leaving only limited domestic websites and partial search functionality online. Now, there is still no clear timeline for restoration. Small businesses that rely on platforms like Instagram and Telegram report devastating losses. One Tehran pet shop owner told the Associated Press that his sales had dropped by 90% since the blackout began. Government-promoted domestic apps have failed to replace lost traffic, and the shutdown compounds an already severe economic crisis. You see, Iran's currency has fallen to roughly 1.4 million rials to the dollar. Inflation is surging, and recent fuel price changes have further strained household budgets. Officials acknowledge the cost. Iran's communications ministry estimates losses between 2.8 to 4.3 million per day. However, internet watchdog NetBlocks put that figure far higher at more than 37 million a day. Researchers say past shutdowns during protests cost the economy billions. And beyond lost revenue, prosecutors have begun targeting businesses accused of supporting demonstrations. Assets of dozens of cafes have been seized. Athletes and cultural figures have been warned against dissent. And with consumer confidence shattered and tens of thousands reportedly arrested, many shops remain open but empty. For audiences at home, this matters because internet shutdowns do not only silence protest, they quietly dismantle livelihoods, deepen economic collapse, and leave recovery even harder once the streets grow quiet. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, we hear internet shutdown and think protests, but what does that actually look like for regular people trying to work or run a business in Iran right now? This poor pet shop owner's business is down 90%. He can't sell any dogs. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we're in the fog of war over there, and it seems like a mass murder happened. It seems like there's a lot of dead bodies. I don't necessarily trust all the data. I don't know what the exact numbers are. I don't think anybody does on any end. But it shows just how few options the Iranian regime still has. It shows just how limited they are, how tough whatever coalition they can put together domestically is going to be, because they're missing out on people who just want to go about their life, people who don't have skin in the game about this person winning or that group winning. And if you lose that middle piece, I don't know if all their allies are going to be enough. I don't know if all of their help from Russia or China is going to be enough to keep this thing together. And it's a tough one because most American Iranian diaspora folks want to see change. It looks like the change they're offering is same of the old stuff. It looks like this would be people who would be aligned with who knows who internationally. So we're not really good at affecting things over in the Middle East. It's not exactly our forte. And in the case of Iran right now, indeed, the pet shop owners and these folks have a choice. It's a very tough one. I heard the only way they protest now is to stay in their buildings and cry and wail. Apparently, everyone is still dealing with all kinds of death and loss in families and tattletales and everything that is just you can imagine to be the worst. So I don't know how Iran gets out of this unchanged. It looks like this is a form of regime change. I think this could get a lot messier than what we saw in Venezuela. And it looks more and more like there is no other way out. So my reaction to this is fog of war. I don't really know too much about the details because I don't think anyone can tell right now. There's narratives coming out
Right.
all the time, lying, lying, lying. Whatever system I think leads to the fewer deaths would be the right one right now because the world is changing around them and Iran can't change the world on its own. So I think it's a hunker down and wait and see and let the fog of war lift and maybe there'll be easy options for them, but it doesn't look like it.
Yeah, and during this fog of war, I thought it was interesting that they mentioned the government is pushing some domestic apps as replacements, but people don't really seem to migrate to those. Why do you feel like those efforts usually fall flat? Is everyone just kind of very distrusting of the whole system right now? So they're like, why would we use any apps that you would give us in the meantime? Is that what's going on here, you think, or maybe something else?
Yeah, yeah, and particularly Iran is one of the most difficult countries when it comes to this because you're really seeing a clash of civilizations. The Persians have generations of education. They're not like the Gulf Coast where this is all kind of new to them. They found a whale. These societies don't go back. I mean, they go back thousands of years, but I mean, in the iteration that we're dealing with today, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, although the tribes go back thousands of years, what we think of as their nation state, what we think of as their country is quite new, and the systems are new, and the educational background is new. I've mentioned on this show before how Saudi had to import education and teachers from Egypt because they just didn't have them. They didn't have those kinds of people. So in the case of Iran, it's strange because it is an ancient civilization. It is an old civilization. It is a civilization that has high academic achievement, high academic standards. And so these people really do understand what's going on with how apps are built and the configuration of them and what a censored internet is versus an uncensored internet. So it's not the same as what we saw in North Africa in 2011 with Libya and Egypt. It's not quite the same. It's something entirely different. And because of that, you're seeing this clash of educated computer science folks, of course, understanding what kind of levers their government is playing on. So indeed, I think it looks like a forced Chinese firewall situation. And even that, even in China to this day doesn't go over very well. So I can't imagine how they're going to institute this. I heard that they're offering the normal internet as like an incentive to their best lackeys over there. The people who listen to the regime the most will get a certain amount of time on the normal internet. I could see them trying to do that, but just to supplicate and corrupt and get a few more people on their side if they give it to them, because indeed one would imagine that the loss of the internet. I had no internet yesterday and I missed my show, and you don't realize what an internet addict you are until you don't have your fix. And yesterday, trying to work without the internet was one of the most erratic psychological days I've ever had, just because your dopamine isn't there. You're like, oh, every time you're like, I'm gonna go check it, I'm gonna go check, and then you can't. So I bet that's what's going on over there.
Yeah, it's always a weird space when you're kind of transported back to those early 90s era where, not everybody had the internet, and we know how central that has become, to everyday life and survival and convenience and the modern economies that we live in. The dopamine, we need that too. And it kind of begs the question, like, let's say Iran were to flip the switch and turn the internet back on tomorrow. How hard is it for, trust and economic activity to come back after something like that, even if they were to restore connectivity? Is there any going back, or is this it?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think they're on a terminal phase right now. This regime is indeed on a terminal phase. They have will left. If the numbers are true and they busted that many heads and killed that many people, then their will to rule is stronger than I thought. But that's all they're left with. They're left with the tightening of the grip. But as we know from Princess Leia, the more you tighten your grip, the more things slip between your fingers. And I think that's what we're going to see over there is the more they tighten their grip, the more dissidents they're going to get. Because at this point, there comes a mind. It's why I never watch these zombie shows, why I can't stand. What was that terrible zombie show where they walked around for years? Walking Dead. Oh my God. Because in The Walking Dead, it's like there's still stressed out that their second cousin twice removed is a zombie and they died in like season 3. Guess what happens when you're
Hmm.
in war? You just get used to it. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the whole answer. I've known people who went to World War II, and I got to ask them when I was a kid, like, in this battle, they were throwing dead bodies into piles. And he said, yeah, the first time I vomited, it sucked. Like, it was very hard. He goes, but then you just do it. You just forget. Like, the mind
Yeah.
will absolutely adapt. And so if you imagine what those people experienced in the past week in Iran, jubilation, thought they were going to win. Trump gave them the suggestion that they were going to get protected. They were not protected. It sounds like the
Hmm.
snipers went nuts on these people and killed a ton of them. And so they did not see what was coming. They did not expect it. But like in war, you reach a certain point where you just don't have emotions about it anymore. You just get on with it. And I imagine if the
Yeah.
death numbers are true, if they killed tens of thousands of people and everyone you were protesting against is dead, from what I know of human nature, it doesn't make people more cowardly. It actually makes them less fearful because there's nothing left to lose. If you already lost your friends, if you already lost your family, if you lost your
Right.
son and you were protesting, what do you really care anymore? Are you going to not protest because you want to? Some might, but it's what we saw from
Yeah.
what I was just mentioning with war. Why I can never watch those Walking Dead movies. The other reason was they would learn something, like when they put the zombie on them and they smell like zombie and then they can hide. Like, why don't you do
Yeah.
that all the time? They can't climb trees. Why
Yeah.
don't
That's
you
that's a
climb a
good
tree?
point.
Like, why don't you get rid of the stairs in the building and you can just live upstairs and you'll be fine. I had to turn it off because it was so unbelievable, because they were so monumentally stupid. I couldn't keep watching. I was like, if I had to live with these people and try and survive with them, I would kill them. And, because it doesn't matter if they're zombies or not, they don't have the IQ to survive. Like, just get over it. People, my second cousin twice
Oh man.
removed, okay, like 3 years into a
You
zombie
you sound like a
apocalypse.
you must be a treat to watch zombies movie with you. Like, there's a tree. There's a tree right there. Why don't they climb it? All right.
Shaun
We
of the
got
Dead was the only
we
watchable
got
one. All right, Shaun of the Dead is the only
yeah.
watchable one. Yeah.
Shaun of the Dead was great. All right, we're going to move on to more news here. This is going over in Canberra as lawmakers are moving quickly after tragedy. You see, Australia is on track to pass sweeping new hate speech and gun control laws following the Bondi Beach shooting. And the legislation cleared the House of Representatives and is expected to pass the Senate later today. Now, for the first time at the federal level, intentionally inciting hatred would become a criminal offense, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Prosecutors would be required to prove intent, and that threshold was designed to protect lawful protest, debate, and political speech. Now, the bill includes exemptions for quoting religious texts, a compromise that helps secure oppositional support. Some civil liberties groups remain unconcerned about uneven enforcement, and beyond the speech laws, the package tightens firearms oversight. It strengthens import controls, expands intelligence sharing, and revives a national gun buyback scheme announced after the attack. Details of the buyback remain limited. Gun owner groups argue Australia already has some of the world's strictest laws and question whether the new measures would have prevented the Bondi shooting. Now, the legislation also expands the powers of the Home Affairs Minister to cancel visas under Australia's caricature test. Now, authorities would gain the ability to formally designate hate groups, making membership or support a criminal offense. The government says the bill balances safety with civil liberties. Critics warn it concentrates power in the executive and could chill lawful expression. For audiences at home, this matters because Australia's response shows how democracies wrestle with violence, speech, and freedom, and how quickly the balance between safety and liberty can shift after a single event. Nolan, what are your first thoughts about this? Is this surprising? Australia already came down hard on gun regulations after a mass shooting years ago. Is this kind of par for the course? Is there anything that surprises you here?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it surprises me, but if you remember when I spoke about this when it happened, I guess 2, 3 weeks ago, when the event
Hmm.
first occurred, I said, well, where do they get the guns from? What I want to know is whatever in this law, how would it prevent what we saw at Bondi Beach the other day? It's not like they went to a
Right.
store and bought those guns, right? What happened? So, what I come back
Yeah.
to all the time is the same thing I said about Trump at the very beginning, how oftentimes people's reaction to Trump to something he said or is thinking about, or what they hallucinate he's thinking about, forces other people into protecting Trump or defending Trump or whatever you want to call it. That overreactions on one end have this sort of Newtonian physics aspect, that it creates a reaction on the other side to say, well, actually, Trump was right, and you end up getting people to defend Trump. Which I always have been saying since 2016 is different. Like, you don't have to lie about what Trump did or said. There's enough to complain about with Trump as it is. But the minute you lie and distort and create narratives and hallucinate things that aren't true, you're compelling people to defend him. And you don't actually want to be in that world. You want the people who like Trump, who also disagree with him, to be able to defend him, not have to defend him all the time. And what I see with this law about hate speech is almost the same thing. Where was the investigation into how this thing happened in the first place? How do we know any of the things they're suggesting will protect anyone in the future? It doesn't look like. They say it's idealized, it's good, we can get people if they're in a hate group. Don't you have laws like that already? I'm sure they do. I'm sure they haven't just woken up and said, wait a minute, we got to stop people from hating. Like, that's all anyone's been talking about for 30 years. Like, I'm pretty sure they have something in Australia to avoid that already. So where's the investigation? If you don't want me to be suspicious of these governments, that what they wanted was the censorship rules, what they wanted was the new systems of control over the immigration. I remember Novak Djokovic not being allowed in. What did they have? They need more immigration powers. It's a continent at the very end of the world. No one is going there just on a whim, and you've already shown your ability to kick people out, like Novak Djokovic a few years ago, because of the vaccine. So they definitely already have these powers. How do these new enhanced powers relate to what actually happened in Bondi Beach that day, / what actually happened in Bondi Beach that day? We still don't know. How do you go from one gun to another position and you're just picking up guns? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Who dealt them the guns? How'd they get them into the country? I want to hear that investigation before I hear about your plans to censor people, that it's going to save them. We don't know where they got the firearms from. I want to know. Then maybe I'll have an opinion on the censorship. Let me know.
Yeah, we really haven't heard much about that. You make a good point. It's like he was just picking up guns like they were, in Grand Theft Auto or something. And it's like,
it was exactly a Grand Theft Auto scene. That's what everyone was saying. That's what I said when I saw it. How is this Grand Theft Auto on Bondi Beach all of a sudden? This guy comes and takes the gun out of your hand, but you run away and find a new gun up on the hill because you got another guy shooting up there. How is he back shooting? Where did the guns come from? With the stands, these were not normal guns that I think you can just pick up in any street corner in Australia. As I understand, they've had way more strict gun buyback forever. So what I want to know is just present anything you want. Maybe we'll have a conversation about hate speech and different rules, but just let me see the investigation first, find out where the holes were that allowed this to happen, and if they can be plugged with laws about guns. And then maybe we'll talk about your plan for how to stop this using regulations and laws going forward. But first, let me see the investigation. Let me find out where they got the guns. I've looked. I haven't seen it. And again, remember, just weirdly, just because nothing is getting solved, remember, we had the same thing happen that weekend in America. We had the supposed Allah Akbar shooting at Yale University of the head of the Bitcoin Republican something. She's dead. And then the same guy, killed the nuclear fusion engineer at MIT 2 days later? What the hell happened to that story? So both of those stories to me seemed like strange, weird redux of Israel, Muslim, all this stuff. And where did it come from? And it just got turned on and turned off. It looks like a button to me, and we don't hear anything about it anymore. This was all just before Christmas, if I remember now, right? This was all just before Christmas when this stuff happened. And I've heard nothing of either investigation.
Yeah, that seems to kind of be the tale of the tape the last couple of weeks. We were supposed to hear about Epstein, then we got Minnesota and a couple other things in Venezuela. what happened there. Now these, yeah, we really haven't heard any new information on these two stories. And kind of what you were mentioning previously, Australia already had really strict gun laws. So it kind of begs the question, like, what specifically changed after the Bondi shooting that's now pushing lawmakers to move this fast? Is it the hate speech element of it? Like, something here isn't adding up for me.
And that, that's what it's been for a lot of people for a long time. Like, what about the very practical police work that still has to be done on this investigation? Just give me the practical police work first, and then we can talk about laws. But I want to see the practical police work. I want to know how they got guns. Who the hell are these people? We're not hearing anything about them, just about how they're going to be so great. They're going to make some rules, and you don't actually need the gun because the rules are going to be so great, and we're actually going to censor you because we don't like hateful people. Okay, but let me find out what happened.
Yeah, we need some answers here. Well, I'm gonna look on the interwebs while we take a quick break here. But when we're back, Nolan and I are going to be talking about the coin that some Venezuelans are turning to now amidst the chaos that's going on over there. We'll be back with that and more after this quick break here at Roxom TV News. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Roxom TV News. The current Bitcoin price is standing at 90K this morning, and our top Bitcoin story of the hour comes from Venezuela. As the economy there continues to strain under inflation and currency controls, millions of Venezuelans are turning to USDT, the dollar-pegged stablecoin issued by Tether, as a financial lifeline. Now, for many Venezuelans, it effectively functions as a digital dollar and is being used for everyday payments. Instead of cash or bank transfers, transactions now move through peer-to-peer marketplaces, messaging apps, and crypto wallets. Venezuela's state oil sector has also relied on USDT for certain international transactions, using stablecoins to bypass sanctions, frozen accounts, and slow correspondent banking systems. Now, that development has pushed crypto deeper into the country's economic infrastructure. While stablecoins like USDT dominate day-to-day usage right now, the trend reinforces a larger Bitcoin-adjacent reality. When trust in governments, banks, and national currencies collapse, people move toward open, borderless monetary tools that work without permission. We're bringing Nolan back. Nolan, for viewers who've never used crypto, why has USDT become such a big part of everyday life in Venezuela?
I try to take a very flat understanding of the word even currency. Currency just means current, like useful right now. And in a digital world, right, the world that we live in, cryptographic keys, the specie, right, that's what we call money, specie. Coinage is a specie. Bills, paper money is a specie. Well, Bitcoin invented cryptographic keys as a specie. It is the actual form of the money. And so in this case, having US dollar take the form of a cryptographic key is just useful in time in a modern world. Being current, it is good currency. It's a good thing to make currency out of a cryptographic key. And so keys are currency now. We're in a world where cryptographic keys are currency. They're useful in real time. They don't require the same kind of infrastructure and deployment. They're sort of off the shelf. And in a case of a country like Venezuela or Argentina to this day, if you go to Argentina for that reason, the US dollar denominations, the specie of USD is more USDT now because it's more useful for those people. It's digital. They don't need a bank account. They can get their Argentine pesos with the USDT. And so it's that case. It's just a off the shelf white label version of the US dollar that can be deployed very easily and is created not by creating debt on the part of the user. It's created in this case by the entire issuer buying US treasuries, plugging into the US Treasury system. So, as well as the way Trump is recalibrating global finance, we see stablecoins being a big part of that because that's part of what it looks like the entire, what is going to be called the Mar-a-Lago Accords, the Stefan Miron, the guy that Trump put on the Federal Reserve Board already. He wrote what are called the Mar-a-Lago Accords. It's a lot like what we're seeing in the case of Greenland. So more or less American trade and tariff used as a type of alignment mechanism, US dollar access as an alignment mechanism. And so this whole scenario aligns Venezuela very simply and sort of off the shelf with the US system. This is a lot like what we've been talking about in that Mar-a-Lago Accord world of bimetallism, one money for spending, one money for saving. So it looks like the weaponization of the US dollar is well underway using cryptographic keys and this particular deployment. So yeah, when I see Venezuelans using it, it makes total sense to me. This is not a Fed Reserve issued coin. It's much more like the old greenbacks that came from the Civil War. The Treasury has a say in how much is issued and under what conditions they're issued. So this is squarely under the control of the US executive branch versus if it was USD coming from banks and issuers like that, then it would be sort of different. So this looks completely like what Trump would have wanted to see, given what we saw in Venezuela a few weeks ago. And it looks like it's right on schedule to what the Mar-a-Lago Accords have suggested and what Stefan Miron is actually putting into place over at the Federal Reserve.
And I would love to kind of talk about the Bitcoin of all of this too, Nolan. Like from a Bitcoin first perspective, how do you see stablecoins functioning in these environments? Are they more of a stepping stone, a workaround, or maybe something more permanent going forward? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's policy money in the sense that fiat has always meant government words. Right? Government words were turned into money. Just like I said, cryptographic keys were turned into money. Well, fiat was government words turned into money. And I think they get what they want. Ultimately, I think it becomes explicitly that. I think that the usefulness of the US dollar is going to be 100% related to government policy. And so I see them more aligning with food stamps, which is exactly what they need in Venezuela. The first order of business over there is to get their agricultural their ability to consume agricultural products up, to get their agricultural industry running again, because it was let fallow for all those years. And so having the right amount of calories there, the right amount of consumption there, that really is a USD government initiative that is policy working its way through the system. Now, the Bitcoin fits in when it comes to non-policy aligned savings, non-sovereign policy aligned savings, individuals saving money outside of this political position is money, political policies are money type world. And that's how bimetallism works, by explicitly doubling down on government policy being money and the USD being government policy being money. You need some other pressure valve, and that is the individually sovereign Bitcoin, because the US dollar is going to continue to come with way more social credit type strings attached. There's definitely going to be, like you're already seeing the Trump administration change food stamps to get rid of the Coca-Cola and the soda. And you're seeing a big debate in America about that. Can they do that? Right? Oh my God. Now, you'll hear a lot of people say, well, Trump and Republicans were against Michael Bloomberg when he wanted to limit the size of Coca-Cola cups. Well, that was the private industry, right? So limiting the private industry and the size of Coca-Cola you can sell was a totally different subject than whether or not food stamps can be used to buy Coca-Cola. And of course, I can see the consistency in those two questions. They're not the same. I don't know how anyone would be confused. So you're going to see explicitly policy come through the food stamp money more and more. Venezuela is getting food stamp money. And so you're going to see the policy come through that. They're not going to be getting Coca-Cola. They're going to be getting who knows what. And in America, maybe for a while they'll get our overburdened Coca-Cola, who knows, but probably not what they need. So you're seeing exactly that. It's policy money, government policy money, the species of money itself, cryptographic keys being useful. It can help government policy be realized across the world without the, how many thousands of economists does it take at the Federal Reserve to mint a US dollar? Nobody knows. It sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. But what we know of with stable coins is they don't need anybody. This is all just digital. And the nature of the technology means it's not counterfeitable, so you save a lot of money on the security of the system that way. And when you see Bitcoin next to it, you realize that this totally entrapped system of government policy is money requires a pressure valve in order to exist. And the pressure valve is the government money, or is the money without any government connections, and that is Bitcoin. That's how they work together in tandem. That's how bimetallism functions in this period, in this transition period.
Yeah, well, it certainly, we've talked about it many times on this show before. It certainly looks like we are headed toward that bimetallic world, especially when you have currencies in South America. It seems like every couple of weeks I hear about another one that's doing terrible and just being eroded by inflation. So it certainly seems to be that is the way the world is going. And we are always so thankful we have you here to help us navigate that new world and explain to us what you think is coming next, Nolan. It's absolutely always a pleasure. So thank you so much for joining us on Roxom TV News here this morning. And we're excited to see you tomorrow for more of the same, buddy.
I appreciate it, Hank. I love coming, and indeed, we're going to have the great joy of watching this play out in Canada, because the Canadian dollar, I predict, will be attacked this year using all of these mechanisms. So that'll prove the theory if it's correct or not. So wait and see.
Wait and see. All right, buddy. Well, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thanks for stopping in, and we'll see you mañana, my friend.
Peace, man.
All right. Thank you. All right, we're taking a quick break here at Roxom TV News, but when we're back, we're going to be jumping into our second hour of today's news, and we're going to be joined in just a bit by two special guests, Cedric of the Bitcoin Matrix podcast, and we'll also be joined by UK journalist Connor Sefton to break down all of the happenings in the world today. So stay tuned. More Roxom TV News coming your way after this quick break. Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card, buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee. And right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. All right, welcome back to Roxom TV News. Now, before we get into the second hour of today's show, here are some of the stories we covered during our first hour. President Trump has a new proposal to create a new board of peace for Gaza, an international body that would sit outside the United Nations. Now, the invitation list, which includes U.S. allies and even Russia's Vladimir Putin, has raised serious questions about legitimacy, power, concentration, and whether this approach stabilizes Gaza or reshapes global diplomacy in far more controversial ways. What began as a tool to suppress protests, the internet shutdown in Iran, has not turned into a financial choke point, wiping out small businesses, accelerating inflation pain, and showing how cutting digital access can dismantle livelihoods long after the streets fall silent. In Australia, lawmakers are pushing toward tougher hate speech and gun laws in the aftermath of the Bondi shooting. The legislation highlights how democracies respond under pressure, raising difficult questions about where public safety ends and civil liberties begin when governments act quickly after national trauma. Now, to our top story of this hour, guys, let's roll the stinger. All right, from Washington to Brussels to the Arctic Circle, a diplomatic standoff that once sounded theoretical is now moving into much more serious territory. U.S. President Donald Trump has escalated his pressure campaign over Greenland, declaring there is no going back on his goal to control the island and refusing to rule out taking it by force. Trump has framed Greenland as essential to what he calls national and world security, a message he has amplified publicly, including through mock-up images portraying Greenland and even Canada as part of the United States. Now, that rhetoric has rattled NATO allies and pushed Europe toward a far more coordinated and confrontational response than seen in earlier phases of this dispute. The escalation became more concrete when Trump announced a 10% tariff on goods from 8 European countries beginning February 1st, unless the United States secures a deal for what he described as the purchase of Greenland. Now, that move effectively tied a territorial issue to trade retaliation, and Europe reacted quickly. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said Trump's threats violate a trade agreement agreed to by the U.S. and EU last July. She warned that Europe's response would be unflinching, united, and proportional. European Union leaders are now preparing for an emergency meeting in Brussels on Thursday, where retaliatory options will be formally discussed. At the same time, the bloc is considering a support package for Greenland itself, including what von der Leyen described as a massive European investment surge, paired with continued cooperation with the United States and other partners on Arctic security. Now, behind the scenes, officials say the goal is twofold: deter U.S. coercion while reinforcing Greenland's economic and political ties to Europe. The retaliation menu under discussion is broad. Europe indicates it could reactivate tariffs on roughly 93 billion euros worth of U.S. goods, measures that were suspended last summer. More significantly, EU officials are openly discussing the possible use of the bloc's never-used anti-coercion instrument. Now, that tool allows the EU to respond to economic pressure not only with tariffs, but with restrictions on investments, access to parts of the EU market, and even limits on public procurement. Now, the mere discussion of the instrument is already being interpreted by markets as a serious warning shot. Trump's dealings with France have also added a personal edge to the dispute. On Monday, Trump published a screenshot of a private exchange with French President Emmanuel Macron, in which Macron questioned what Trump was doing on Greenland. Trump responded by threatening a 200% tariff on French wines and champagnes and publicly criticized Macron for refusing to join Trump's proposed Board of Peace. Let's take a look at how that exchange played out.
Do you have any response to President Macron saying he will not join the Board of Peace?
Oh, did he say that? Well,
Yeah.
Nobody wants him because he's going to be out of office very soon. So, that's all right. What I'll do is if they feel like Costa, I'll put a 200% tariff on his wines and champagne.
Even within the U.S. administration, there are signs of an effort to slow the temperature here. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent pushed back on what he called hysteria, urging observers to avoid assuming worst-case outcomes and arguing that the situation is still in its early stages. Still, Trump's language, especially the phrase "no going back," has left allies unconvinced that this is simply posturing. Russia has moved quickly to distance itself from Trump's claim that a U.S. takeover of Greenland is necessary to block Russian or Chinese expansion. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow has no plans and no interest in seizing control of Greenland, adding knowing Washington is fully aware of that. Now, Lavrov framed Russia's Arctic posture as focused on open and free cooperation, not territorial acquisition. However, he also questioned Denmark's historical claim to Greenland, calling it a legacy of colonial conquest rather than a natural territorial arrangement. That comment stopped short of endorsing U.S. ambitions, but still struck a nerve in Europe, where Greenland's status is considered settled. Analysts say Russia's strategy here is deliberate. By denying aggressive intent, Moscow removes one of Washington's central security justifications while also allowing tensions between the U.S. and Europe to escalate on their own. In effect, Russia benefits from Western division without taking on new political or economic risk itself. And markets are reacting less to Greenland as a territory and more to what the standoff represents. Trump's tariff threats have revived talk of a so-called Sell America trade as investors reassess exposure to U.S. assets amid rising policy and unpredictability. The immediate reaction has been sharp. S&P 500 futures fell as much as 1.6%. European stocks dropped around 1.2%, and the Nasdaq led losses. Investors moved into defensive positions. Gold surged to a record above $4,700 an ounce. The U.S. dollar weakened. The Swiss franc strengthened. Classic risk-off signals when geopolitics and trade policy collide. European markets have been particularly sensitive, with Danish assets under pressure and concerns spreading into trade-exposed sectors like autos and luxury goods. Long-dated U.S. Treasury yields rose, reflecting unease about policy direction rather than confidence in growth. Now, strategists say markets are pricing volatility, not collapse. But they warn that if tariff threats harden into formal action, or if Europe deploys its anti-coercion tools, the turbulence could turn into a broader repricing of risk across both sides of the Atlantic. Now, all of this is unfolding against the backdrop of the 2026 World Economic Forum in Davos. You see, the Greenland dispute has become a dominant theme among global leaders, CEOs, and policymakers gathered in Switzerland this weekend. Executives say the tone at Davos has shifted noticeably, with geopolitics crowding out conversations that were once focused on growth, innovation, and sustainability. European leaders have used the Davos stage to push back. Ursula von der Leyen warned that linking trade retaliation to territorial disputes risks undermining cooperation across defense, commerce, and global security. And what began as a question about Greenland has now become a litmus test for the future of transatlantic relations. All right, joining me to talk about this story and others, we have Cedric Jungelman of the Bitcoin Matrix podcast and Connor Sefton, the UK journalist. Gentlemen, how are we this morning? Great to see you both. Connor, how are you? Same for you, Cedric.
Very well,
how are you doing?
thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Just trying to make sense of all of this craziness in the world. How are you, Connor?
Yeah, thriving, thank you. Not bad.
Love to hear it. Cedric, how about you, my friend? How are you on this Tuesday?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Thanks so much. Nice to see you again, Hank, and nice to meet you, Connor.
Oh.
Nice to meet you too.
Pleasure is always ours, gentlemen. Great to have you both. And Connor, I want to start with you on this story. We talked a little bit about it when we had you on the story. I think it was last week. When people hear Greenland, it can still sound a little abstract. So let's ground this for a second. What has actually changed in the last few days that makes this standoff feel more serious than maybe some of the early rounds of rhetoric we were hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I might have to eat my words, might I? You know, I was on this call with Nolan on the interview last week, and I was like saying, it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. And things really have heated up, haven't they? And I mean, we just need to remember here that, this is my opinion, and I think many European leaders would say this as well, Trump's behavior is unhinged, it's embarrassing. World leaders are against him. Democrats are against him. The American public's against him when it comes to taking over Greenland. Republicans are sitting on their hands. And I think that, you know, we're 1 year now after Trump's inauguration, and European leaders need to completely change their stance towards Trump because flattery just isn't working anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And Cedric, what is your initial beat on this story? We've seen it in the news now for a couple of weeks. Where are you landing on what's going on currently?
Sure. I think the main theme for me is what does it really mean to be a sovereign nation in 2026, especially after what we saw in Venezuela? And just what does that mean in terms of power, energy, military strength? So I kind of see this taking of Greenland maybe as inevitable, the way it's playing out, the way how embarrassingly done it's being done in public, the releasing of private messages, the way world leaders are speaking to each other, this coming on the flank of Venezuela, the comments around Colombia, Cuba. So I think it's going to happen. The fact that he's saying it during the World Economic Forum when they're all gathering together, I think that shows a lot of bravado. I think it's strange that he's commenting on the sort of outside of the plane in these off-the-cuff situations. So it's not very formal. It's but that says to me how brash it is, and I just think that he's following orders, and this is the job he has to get done. But I think this is about sort of the world going to a multipolar world, and where it's not just U.S. led, but I think what we're seeing with China and what we're going to get into some stories in a minute about the UK and America. It's a fracturing sort of an Eastern-Western thing, hemispheres.
Yeah, no. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of change going on right now, and it starts with this story. And Connor, this next one's for you. I'd be curious, the United States already has people stationed in Greenland. Why do you think that Trump is choosing to go about this the way he has currently when there seemingly could be more diplomatic ways you could do this? Is he just feeling really emboldened after the Venezuela situation and he's trying to run on that momentum? What do you make of this? Because it seems like there might be more peaceful solutions than kind of what we're hearing right now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this whole kind of resurgence of his desire for Greenland did come immediately after Venezuela. You're right. And the thing is, like you say, there are actually other options. Denmark is actually pretty on board with America having a more pronounced presence on Greenland. They have no problem with further military bases or a further military presence. And to be honest, it's quite a bit of a messy situation for Denmark when it comes to Greenland, because Denmark's responsible for things like foreign affairs and defense. And actually, the US taking control of this could ultimately end up being a bit of a pain, really, for Trump. So I'm not entirely sure why he wants this particular control. I mean, the tricky thing that's happened with these tariffs that he's proposed that would come into force very soon is that it kind of splinters Europe in a way. The whole of Europe doesn't think with one mind. The European Union's 27 member states. You've got Poland and the Baltic states. They're going to be really nervous about losing American security protections that's, against Russian aggression. That may happen if Trump doesn't get his own way. And also, there are countries like Italy, which would be really affected by American tariffs, and they aren't currently named as one of the countries that are going to face tariffs. They might want to roll over and let Trump have Greenland rather than risk being caught up in this economic trade war.
Yeah, it really is. It's interesting because this feels kind of like he's very purposely trying to dismantle all of these allies we had in Europe. And yeah, it puts him in a weird position. Cedric, what is your beat on this currently? What do you think Trump is trying to do right now, or why is he trying to go about it in this way?
Well, I think he's also smashing the old associations of the UN, the European Union, our alliance with the European Union, NATO, and what NATO's purpose is. I mean, this is an inter-NATO or intra-NATO battle here. And so I think he's sort of threatening the old world order and moving the world very quickly into a new world order. It's still, there's many hypotheses on what that means, but there's a huge, it's like decades are happening every day, not even every week.
Yeah, we are seeing some really big changes in a very short amount of time. And Connor, you kind of mentioned this just a second ago. Trump is now openly tying tariffs to territorial pressure, which is not something allies are really used to. So my question for you, Connor, is how unusual is it for trade policy and territorial ambition to kind of be fused this directly? I can't really recall the last time I saw something quite like this.
You're absolutely right, Hank. I mean, this is a situation, like you say, where tariffs are being used on allies rather than adversaries. And the ultimate problem with this, and this is something that European leaders are starting to wake up to, is that Trump's word practically means nothing. Trade agreements were reached in the aftermath of Liberation Day last year. Trump has now ripped all of these up, and he's now slapping tariffs because he's irritated with European countries that he isn't getting what he wants. And Europe needs to think carefully about what they do here. Because if they roll over and if they give him an inch, there's nothing to stop him from coming back and saying, actually, this territory, this European territory is also really important for American security going forwards. And we saw last year when Trump was suing American media outlets, whether it was CBS or ABC, they settled. And this created a precedent that emboldened him to sue more media outlets. And if Europe rolls over with Greenland, this could be the start of many other territories that follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Cedric, where do you land on that? Do you agree with Connor that this could just be the beginning of this type of pressure Trump is putting on territories that he has ambitions for? What are your thoughts?
This seems to be very much the beginning. And to what Connor was saying, I think that this indicates that there's probably a deal already on the table around Taiwan. I'm not sure if sort of we made a deal. It seems like every one of them could have a quid pro quo around Venezuela, Ukraine, Greenland, and Taiwan. So I think that Trump spoke to President Xi like hours before the Maduro operation. Who knows? I wonder how much of this is a surprise to the other leaders, or how much they're working together to sort of roll out an agreed upon destination.
It's definitely a huge surprise, I would say. I mean, Liberation Day, I go back to that, there were world leaders watching television and finding out with the rest of the world what tariff their country was going to pay. And I think that what's happened with these tariffs over the past few days has definitely blindsided European leaders, especially in the UK. And I think as well, this isn't just on the European leaders. There was a great Bloomberg column today that suggested that, European consumers might need to start boycotting American goods, might need to start reconsidering whether or not they're going to go to the World Cup, hit the US economy where it hurts to get Trump to back down. Scott Bessent saying calm the hysteria down. It's the Trump administration that's causing the hysteria.
Yeah. It's a wild thing to act this way toward your supposed allies. And I'll be very curious to see how this all plays out. I mean, like you said, we had our talk last week, Connor, and it already seems like things are shifting more in the direction that I think you and I both thought were unlikely, but never doubt President Trump, I guess. When that man puts his mind to something, watch out. Yeah. All right, we're going to move on to our next story, gentlemen, and this is also a Trump one, so get ready, because now President Trump is criticizing Britain for transferring sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, calling the move an act of great stupidity. Now, Trump argued the decision weakens Western security and cited it as further proof that the United States should take control of Greenland. Now, that criticism comes despite the fact that Trump's own administration previously supported the Chagos Agreement. Now, the islands include Diego Garcia, home to a major joint U.S.-UK military base that Washington considers vital for operations across the Middle East, South Asia, and East Africa. Trump warned China and Russia could exploit what he described as a display of weakness by a NATO ally. Now, the UK government, they pushed back, noting the deal includes a lease guaranteeing U.S. and British access to Diego Garcia for at least 99 years. British officials say the agreement strengthens the base's legal footing after years of pressure from the United Nations and international courts to return the islands. Now, the Chagos Islands were detached from Mauritius in the 1960s, and residents were forcibly removed to make way for the military facility. U.S. officials had previously welcomed the deal, calling it a way to ensure long-term stability for the base. Now, Trump's reversal places him at odds with the earlier U.S. policy and adds strain to already tense transatlantic relations. The dispute has sparked backlash inside of Britain, with critics warning of security risks, while displaced Chagosians say they were never properly consulted. For viewers at home, this story matters because it highlights how strategic territory, historical injustice, and shifting political positions can collide, testing alliances that have been long taken for granted. Let's start with you, Connor. This is happening in your backyard. What's your initial beat on this story here? How are you guys feeling across the pond about it?
This really took the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, here by surprise. And the feeling among British politicians is that it is retaliation for what's been happening in Greenland. On this story, though, it is worth noting that there are quite a few people who do side with Trump on this one. Like you mentioned, Chargossian people in the UK, not all of them, some of them, are really angry with the UK government, and they've been trying to get the courts to review the decision. They actually draw parallels to Greenland because the UK is saying that anything to do with Greenland's future must be decided by the people of Greenland. And they feel that there's a double standard, and that's not being applied with the Chagos Islands because the decisions are not being made involving them. And to be honest, most political parties as well here in the UK are against the sale of the Chagos Islands back to Mauritius. They don't want it to happen. I mean, the Conservatives have said that Trump's right and it's complete self-sabotage. Reform UK, which is leading in the polls here, they've said that Trump's right to veto. Keir Starmer is facing a bit of a backlash on this one, not just from Trump.
Yeah, appreciate the boots on the ground of what's actually going on over there, Connor. And Cedric, what are your initial thoughts on this story? What are you feeling about this?
This lines up with everything we've been talking about with sovereignty. And it does seem like, to me, self-sabotage by the UK. I can understand sort of the 180 by the Trump administration trying to question this deal and whether it makes sense. With everything going on in the world today, I don't think this is a smart move by the UK or in line with how things are going. I think it is relinquishing sovereignty over a key island that is really opening things up to China and Russia in terms of shipping, security, and different things. So, and to Connor's point, they're not bringing this to the people of the island of Chagos. They're just sort of handing it to them, or handing their sovereignty to Mauritius. So, and I think this is an interesting way for the UK to print money, to sell it back and have it, have to spend 120 million pounds per year just for the right to then lease it for the same needs that the U.S. is arguing that they're relinquishing. So it seems like really just shooting themselves in the foot right now.
Yeah, I think my main concern with this story is, it was just the fact that...
No, please.
Why now? It's like... okay, the Trump administration may or may not have had concerns. That's okay. It's okay to have a disagreement with another country's decision to do something. But when Marco Rubio is describing it as a monumental achievement, when Trump's in the Oval Office after the deal is signed saying it's great, to suddenly turn around when it's politically expedient to say, actually, oh, it's stupid, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Connor. With Trump now attacking a deal his own administration previously supported, how is that being received in the UK, especially among officials who thought that this issue was settled?
Not well. I mean, this is the thing, the one thing that's been an enduring theme for the UK and the US for decades is this special relationship. And, Keir Starmer has been bending over backwards to try and maintain that with Donald Trump. Donald Trump has gone to loggerheads with several politicians in this country, most notably the London mayor, Sadiq Khan, who he absolutely despises. Sadiq Khan is a Labour Party mayor, and Keir Starmer is a Labour Party prime minister. Keir Starmer doesn't seem to have had that same political fallout with Trump yet, but there's going to become a point where it's going to become inevitable, because Keir Starmer, and he actually admitted this in a news conference yesterday, he knows that the British people are fed up with him kind of like bending the knee to Trump and rolling over and trying to be inoffensive. They want him to stand up for the UK, and he's not doing that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the only way to fight a bully is you got to stand up to the bully. And this next one is for you, Cedric. Trump has linked Chagos to Greenland. So my question to you is he making a coherent strategic case here, or is this more about reinforcing a broader message that allies can't be trusted with key territories? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It seems in line with the thinking or actions of the last year or so. My overriding question is, why are they doing this this is not great for allies. It's against allies. It hasn't been great for things at home for him, I think, in terms of domestic morale and sort of how people feel about his first year. So I'm not sure why they're going for all of this now. It does seem tit for tat, but it seems like all cards are on the table since the Maduro operation, and everyone, I think, or all these nations have to be rethinking their sovereignty, how they enforce that, and their alliances. It sort of in a world where it's obviously political. There's a lot of short-term thinking, and these paper alliances can go away or be turned against you in a heartbeat. And it doesn't seem like there's a decorum around international law anymore, or how things should proceed with order. So.
Yeah, no, this is certainly inserting a lot of question marks into the global stage. And stepping back here, Connor, this one's for you. Do you think that this dispute reveals some cracks in the U.S.-UK kind of special relationship we've had? Or is this more noise than signal in the long run? Or is this, in fact, you think maybe the start of something bigger? What's your beat on this?
It's a great question. I think that this definitely is a sign of cracks and pressure. And this has been building for a long time in multiple ways. It's not just about the Chagos Islands. It's not just about Greenland. The UK and US had signed a tech deal a few months ago, and then that actually was abandoned. There's been multiple ways that the pressure between the UK and the US has been building. And, we're 1 year into a 4-year term. Keir Starmer will also be the Prime Minister throughout this period because he has a 5-year term. I just don't see things improving. I think if they were to improve, that would involve Trump backing down, and we know he doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And last one for Cedric, this is for you. What do you think Trump's endgame is here? It feels like he is ultimately changing alliances the United States has held near and dear for decades. And in just a couple of weeks, we're seeing fractures that I feel like haven't really seen before. What do you think the plan is here? Do you have any thoughts on that? It's a lot, I know.
It seems like the UK is really turning towards China or dancing with China. And I think the United States under the Trump administration is looking to line up all their cards and allies up and down from North America and South America through stable coins, through CBDCs, financial surveillance, AI, energy, minerals, rare earths, and bring home manufacturing, maybe not to America itself, but maybe to Central and South America, and mineral extraction back to the Eastern Hemisphere under the purview and sovereignty of the United States. Rather than sort of having this relationship or codependency with China going forward.
Mm-hmm. All right, so it's a resetting of the world stage. Yikes, I don't know if I'm ready for it, but I appreciate you guys lending us your insights as we talk about it here. And we're going to move on to our next story here. As across European markets, a joke has started moving real money. You see, for several days, Elon Musk has floated the idea of buying Ryanair amid a high-profile online feud with the airline's outspoken CEO, Michael O'Leary. Musk posted a poll on X asking whether he should purchase the airline and restore Ryan as their rightful ruler, referencing Ryanair's late co-founder, Tony Ryan. Now, the clash began after O'Leary dismissed the idea of installing SpaceX's Starlink internet on Ryanair planes due to cost, weight, and fuel concerns. Musk fired back, calling O'Leary misinformed. O'Leary responded with personal insults. Markets, well, they paid attention. Ryanair shares jumped as much as 2% following Musk's comments, briefly adding billions to the airline's market value. Ryanair is valued at roughly €30 billion, making it one of Europe's largest carriers, and analysts caution that a takeover would face major obstacles. European airlines are subject to strict foreign ownership limits, and Ryanair's shareholder structure, which includes O'Leary himself, would complicate any bid. Still, investors remember that Musk's unsolicited Twitter poll in 2022 ended with a $44 billion acquisition. All right, I'm bringing the guys back. Connor, I'm starting with you. What are your initial thoughts on this? Ryanair, I know, is a big, prevalent airline in Europe. What are your initial thoughts on this? Is he for real, or is this just Musk doing his thing?
I mean, talking about men with fragile egos, here we go. Ryanair I don't know, I've got to ask before I go into this, have either of you flown Ryanair before?
No.
I have.
Okay. You have. My condolences.
Yeah, it makes Spirit look like luxury. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a classic no frills airline. They advertise their seats. It's like, oh, £10 a ticket. And then by the time you've added on luggage, seats, everything else, it's hundreds of pounds. And then you'll fly to Paris or London or wherever, and you'll be 70 miles away from the city centre. They are unashamedly a no frills airline, and they make no qualms about it. They're proud of it, really. And, the reason why Michael O'Leary, who, despite what Elon Musk says, is an excellent businessman, the reason why he doesn't want Starlink on his planes is because of the sheer amount of fuel cost that it will add. $250 million a year it will cost to install Starlink because of the fuel lag. So it's worth bearing that in mind. Yeah, it's serious. And it's like, there's been stories about this before, about how like airlines have like removed a single olive from a dinner and have saved millions, because when you multiply that across millions of dinners, like you're saving loads of weight. So I think this is thoroughly unserious. I do not think that Elon Musk will own Ryanair, nor do I think that customers would actually want them to.
Yeah, I agree. And, this is an interesting trend we're starting to see in the last couple of years, right? Like something starts as an online spat, but the market reaction to the spat becomes very real. So Cedric, this one's for you. Why do you think investors still take Elon Musk's jokes seriously enough to move billions of dollars in market value? Is it because he's done it before with Twitter, so he's liable to do it again? Or is that just the world we live in now?
Oh, well, I think Elon Musk is the greatest salesman on earth right now. He could sell water to a whale. He said it himself. If he woke up tomorrow with no money, which would be just blow his own mind based on how smart he is and productive and valuable he is to society, on his own opinion, that he would just raise trillions more. He could just attract investment. So I think that this is actually, I'm going to take the opposite view. I think this is really serious. I think Musk has looked at every industry where he can apply electric power, whether that's even coming from original carbon sources and redistributed through sort of electric hookups. So that's trucking, that's cabs, it's all kinds of automobiles, vehicular automobiles. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's thinking about getting into air travel. Air travel is incredibly subsidized and centralized, and it's practically a national industry in all countries anyway. So the fact that this Ryan guy wants to run his airline efficiently makes sense to me. But Elon Musk could be thinking, I can get $500 million a year from the government to subsidize the $250 million cost, and I can make $1 on each dollar we're losing there. Maybe not pass on the expense, or then pass it on to the customer anyway. So I think whether he buys this airline or he's now looking at buying another one, I think he can raise the money. I don't think it's expensive to him in terms of the credit and debt or credit and capital he could attract and deploy. It's now he'd be on his 17th company or whatever he claims to run, because I don't believe he's actually running these companies, but I think he can amass the portfolio almost like a hedge fund owner, or be chairman of the board of all these in actuality, maybe deal with them a little bit and give some guidance, but or maybe he's more hands-on than I think. But I think this could be very real. I think that whether it's this airline or another one, I think he'd be garnering interest, support, and move into another industry for sort of nation state capture in a way.
Yeah, I think I would be completely on board with the idea of Elon Musk owning an airline. I just think culturally, I think Ryanair is the complete wrong airline for him to own. This is a brand that knows its flaws, embraces them on social media. It's pretty rude and obnoxious to customers, doesn't mind being criticized, unlike Elon Musk, who's got a pretty thin skin. They regularly tease their customers on social media. Michael O'Leary has previously suggested things like, oh, we should charge for people to stand up in their seats, or we should charge people to use the toilet. They're the pantomime villains. They know that they are hated and they love the attention. And I think that the type of airline that Elon Musk would run, which I probably imagine would actually be pretty decent, is entirely different to what Ryanair positions itself as. And if you look on their social media, which I highly recommend you do, they really poke fun at people, and they were mocking Elon Musk the other day after X went down, asking him if they needed any Wi-Fi.
Oh boy, there it is. That's what really started all this. Let's be real. And yeah, I don't know if Elon Musk would really be interested in owning like the Ed DeBevics of the airline space. I don't think he's got enough of a sense of humor about himself. I don't know if you guys have Ed DeBevics across the pond, but yeah, Cedric might land with him on that one. It was this restaurant chain where everybody was rude to you purposely, and that was kind of part of the fun. And it sounds like Ryanair has kind of embraced that culture a little bit. But yeah, I liked a lot what Cedric was saying. You know, Elon would do a great job with an airline. Maybe you could make it electric at some point. And he's already got the ground travel. He's got the Boring Company. So the subterranean travel, why not get the air travel too? You can all package it together. But from a practical standpoint, and this one's for Connor, how realistic is a Ryanair takeover given Europe's foreign ownership rules and the airline's existing shareholder structure? That seems like an obstacle in and of itself.
That's a really good question. I've got to be honest, I'm not fully across the ownership rules of European airlines, but looking at the share price before we came on, Ryanair ended the day in Dublin down about 1%. I don't think that shareholders are taking this entirely seriously. Perhaps maybe they would be receptive to an offer if it was good enough, but at the moment it's a publicly listed company. And I think that, Ryanair is a very lucrative, very successful, a very prominent airline in Europe, and it's got a winning formula. And I think that shareholders who believe in the actual business won't want to mess around with that too much because they're onto something that's, works.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, we're going to move on to the next story, Cedric, unless you got any final thoughts on Ryanair, but you've never flown it, so I wouldn't expect it if you did. It would be okay.
No, I'm good.
All right, we're going to move on. You're good? Yeah. Good. Okay, we're going to move on then, guys. All right, this one we're going to go actually across the pond again into London, as just steps from the Tower of London, the city's financial arteries, a quiet planning decision has turned into a loud national security debate. Excuse me. The UK government has approved plans for China to build what would become Europe's largest Chinese embassy at Royal Mint Court after Britain's intelligence chief said the risks could be managed. Now, the proposed embassy would house more than 200 staff and consolidate 7 existing Chinese diplomatic locations into a single complex. Now, UK officials argue that centralization could actually make monitoring Chinese diplomatic activity easier, not harder. Critics, though, remain unconvinced, as lawmakers from across parties warn the embassy could become a hub for Chinese intelligence operations. Former security officials and civil liberties groups have also raised concerns about intimidation of overseas Chinese communities operating near the site. Now, local residents are preparing a legal challenge, saying they plan to seek a judicial review that could delay construction for months or even years. All right, gentlemen, so let's get into this. Connor, first for you, as someone who's over in the UK, what are your initial thoughts on this? Could you see this as being problematic? Where do you initially land on this story?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of concern about this super embassy because the initial blueprint had completely redacted areas where they weren't saying what the rooms would be used for, or any detail about how these parts of the Chinese embassy would be used. And that's acutely concerning if you're allowing a country to create an embassy on foreign soil. To be honest, I think many of the critics aren't against China having an embassy. They've currently got 7 buildings dotted around the capital. I think the issue in particular, which you've touched on in your intro, is the actual location and the fact that it's very close to this sensitive cabling for the City of London. It's in a very historic building. It's going to be a very big building. And yes, the fact that initially those plans had redacted rooms, not a great look.
Yeah, absolutely. And this one's for you, Cedric. As Connor mentioned, this site sits near some critical and financial and data infrastructures. How much weight do you think the public should really put on those proximity concerns that we're hearing about?
Well, it concerns me. This reminds me of Killenworth, which was a historic mansion in Glen Cove, New York, which was constructed for George Pratt in 1912, but it was purchased by the Soviet Union in 1946, and it became a country retreat. And in the 1970s and 80s, it came under a lot of allegations, And then in the 1980s, the facility was subject to allegations that it was being used for espionage. And they were even stating that the top floors were occupied for equipment with signals intelligence. Now, I'd like to think that these telecommunications companies are impenetrable and proximity is not a concern of any sort, and that they got their bases covered. But the fact that certain areas are redacted and there are concerns from certain intelligence agencies about this, I don't know why you would want, a Chinese embassy that could have this much concern. But there's several others already in the city. And just like on Long Island, there were several other mansions the Russians owned. And even in 2016, Obama announced that 2 Russian diplomatic facilities were going to be closed down as part of retaliation for Russian interference. And a lot of people thought it was going to be Killenworth, and then it wasn't. And it never got closed down, and it's still used for Russian diplomatic activities. So then you think, okay, proximity is not a major concern. So, but, I think the 2 leaders of each country even had a personal call about this. So why would it be so important to China?
Yeah.
So I think you would think UK would act with hesitation, but the fact that they're not and the leadership really wants to move forward with this, to me, is alarming.
Yeah, super interesting parallel. I appreciate you bringing that to our attention because I was not familiar with that myself. And, with this situation, too, the timing here really seems to matter because we have Prime Minister Starmer preparing for a visit to Beijing. So, Connor, this one's for you. How much of this discussion is about diplomacy versus pure planning policy right now? Do you think are those kind of going hand in hand? Is the timing of this really, does it matter, do you feel like? Or is it just coincidence?
I think it does matter. Yeah, I think that both are going hand in hand. I mean, this has been delayed repeatedly over the years for the concerns that we've talked about. And, there are some who say from a security standpoint, actually consolidating from 7 buildings that China has right now down to 1 could have benefits in some ways or another. But we are in a situation where some politicians are really angry at the government because what they're saying is that the UK is now being soft on China at a time when Beijing is ramping up intimidation. Just last year, we had a case involving 2 alleged British spies for China who were apparently helping to get information out of Parliament to Chinese intelligence services. They were meant to be going on trial, and that trial collapsed. And there were suggestions that that was to appease the Chinese Communist Party. There's also been intimidation of Chinese academics who work in British universities. There's been issues surrounding people who are from Hong Kong, who live in the UK, bearing in mind that Hong Kong used to be an overseas British territory. So there are multiple ways that China is actually exerting pressure on the UK. And the fear is that this just sends the wrong signal, approving this £225 million site right now with these lingering security concerns. There is a fear it could backfire.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you, I always get a little uneasy with those mega churches, so I don't know how I'd feel about a mega Chinese embassy moving in next door to me, but that's just me, and that maybe is a topic for another day. All right, guys, we're going to go to our top Bitcoin story of the day now and chat about it. So, guys, let's roll the stinger and get into it. All right, our top Bitcoin story of the hour brings us back to London, where a familiar debate inside Britain's financial regulators is picking up new urgency. A new Forbes article by Susie Violet Ward, co-founder and CEO of Bitcoin's Policy UK, argues regulators are still making a basic mistake by treating Bitcoin and all other crypto assets as the same thing. Ward explains that early regulation favored speed over precision. Lumping all digital assets together made sense when policymakers were reacting quickly to a new technology. But as rules move from theory into enforcement, that shortcut is starting to break down. Bitcoin, she notes, has operated for more than 15 years as a decentralized monetary network with no issuer, no central governance, and no discretionary monetary authority. Now, most other crypto assets, by contrast, rely on identifiable teams, ongoing token issuance, and centralized control, treating both as the same risk flattens critical differences. Now, that approach can also confuse consumers. You see, UK regulatory messaging often implies Bitcoin and highly speculative meme tokens are equally risky, despite radically different structures and maturity. Ward argues this does not protect the public. In fact, it distorts decision-making. And the article also highlights practical failures when issuer-based rules are applied to Bitcoin. Disclosure, governance, and compliance frameworks assume someone is in charge. In a permissionless network, those assumptions simply do not fit. And Bitcoin-backed lending is cited as a clear example, where rules designed for unsecured consumer credit struggle to map onto collateralized auto-liquidating loans. Industry groups, including Crypto UK, warn that without a same risk, same regulation approach, Britain risks pushing innovation offshore. For viewers at home, this matters because regulatory clarity will shape where companies build, how consumers are protected, and whether Bitcoin is treated as a monetary network or just another speculative token. All right, we're going to come back to the guys here. I'm going to start with Cedric on this one. Cedric, regulators often talk about crypto as a single risk bucket. For everyday viewers out there, why does this framing start to break down once rules move from theory into enforcement? What is your beat on this situation currently?
Sure. Well, most of the rules are written, like you were saying before, based on issuer and from the perspective of an issuer and sort of the user. And there is no issuer in Bitcoin. There is no marketing department, no CEO, no administration, no HR. So there's no one to sort of interact with on that level. There's no one or agency to kind of have that purview, and making rules for a decentralized system that really apply to centralized systems kind of muck things up for the users, that the people who want to interact with a decentralized system. I happen to think that this confusion is sort of a feature, not a bug for them, because it sort of limits and inhibits and it confuses privacy on the Bitcoin network and self-custody and thinking about, a real decentralized cryptocurrency for, I don't think they want the users to really think about that. But for Bitcoiners, it leads to terrible regulations and laws. And I think right now there's this rush to get laws in line and in place. And I'd rather almost them move slower and not break things, especially for privacy and self-custody.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Connor, what's your initial beat on this story from Susie?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Cedric said. And I think about what Michael Saylor said, actually. I think it was at the blockchain conference in Istanbul a few years ago. And he was looking at how Bitcoin is different from, say, Ethereum, because Ethereum's going through all of these upgrades all the time. And every upgrade creates this new attack vector, which makes it unstable and unsafe. And, Bitcoin doesn't have, this degree of a problem. And I think that part of the problem is what Cedric was talking about. Bitcoin doesn't have a PR department. Bitcoin doesn't have these certain departments pushing things forward. And that means sometimes there's a risk that the voice of Bitcoiners gets lost against deep-pocketed lobbying groups representing whether it's Ripple or whether it's another cryptocurrency. And we saw this tension when Donald Trump first announced that crypto reserve that didn't actually pan out back last March, I think it was. And out of the blue on a Sunday, he said, oh, yeah, this reserve's going to have XRP, it's going to have ADA, it's going to have all of these small altcoins, none of which the US owned, by the way, but apparently it was going to include them. And then Bitcoin and Ether were described as an afterthought. And when I interviewed a guy called Peter McCormack, he's a British Bitcoin podcaster here, he was saying that, this isn't Trump's fault. This is the fault of people who are advising him and people who are close to him. Bitcoiners need to make sure that their voices are being heard when it comes to legislation and regulation, because, you're going to have loads and loads of altcoin projects with very slick marketing departments putting forward their case, but someone needs to put forward Bitcoin's case as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we're lucky to have a lot of, gentlemen like you on the show and ladies too that are putting that Bitcoin case forward for the world. Because like you guys said, there is no marketing department. And, UK messaging sounds like it's often lumping Bitcoin together with meme tokens. So Cedric, my question for you is, how does that affect consumer understanding rather than actually protecting people? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's been horrible for consumer understanding and sentiment. I think one of the biggest reasons we've seen negative sentiment in Bitcoin, sort of price action. And mind you, Bitcoin was at an all-time high in Q4 of last year, and it's about 120 days away. So we do have sort of short-term thinking here, but there's negative price sentiment. And I think it really started on the Trump coin. I think that was sort of the peak of sentiment for the year. I mean, every day there was bullish news and development and infrastructure being built. So I feel like 2026 is a big repeat of 2025. It's not guaranteeing an outlook, but I think that we have the same excitement, or same reasons to be excited, just almost 10 times the amount of reasons, but the same sort of with a better macro setup. So it's almost, you could forget about 2025, and I'd go into 2026 the exact same way, or feeling the same way I did going into 2025. But I think the Trump coin, and then right away the Melania coin, muddied the water for a lot of consumers, soured a lot of people on sort of the freedom nature, the separation of money from state that Bitcoin represents. It made it feel scammy. I mean, affinity scams are scammy, and I think they were scammy or scams. And, I'd wonder how much the Trumps actually made on those things, or whether they just licensed away the right to do those things, and whether they got like a fixed fee or they really partook. You saw it in New York City with the Democratic mayor of New York, Eric Davis, I think, or Eric Adams, I forget his name. He did a similar scam, and I looked at some of the numbers, and I didn't verify these numbers, but it looked like it was about a $4 or $5 million pump and dump, and it looked like he pulled out maybe 2 to 3 million of that very quickly. And I think that it's something that kind of gets overlooked on both sides. And Eric, for the mayor of New York, I think that's about 100% of his net worth. I think he went into this declaring he was worth about 2 to 3 million, and then it looks like he made about 2 or 3 million in 48 hours. So you could see why for, any individual, the incentive to do this is so great and the risk is so low. It doesn't look like anyone's going to go to jail. This is predatory finance. This has nothing to do with DeFi or anything like that. On the other hand, I think that this might be indicative of campaigning going forward. So money is a shared consciousness. The people are getting more nihilistic, and there's more gambling in our culture because money is broken. But I could see all politicians of all nature raising money, and whoever raises the most money with their meme coin sort of has the most money and capital to spend on their campaign, to out-market, out-meme. And it's a demonstration of backing by their supporters. And I think it could be a way then to say, if you don't support, I could see being a lot of repercussions and consequences for people who didn't. And this being used for surveillance in all sorts of ways and coercion. So maybe it is indicative of a future here that they're iterating on. But it is incredibly scammy, and it happens on both sides. And I think it ruined things for retail. I mean, imagine you're sitting on $50,000 to $150,000 in total net worth, locked up, and most of it in either your house or your retirement vehicles, and you're trying to understand this Bitcoin thing at 95,000, 100,000, and you're getting excited about it. You see everything's going well, and then the political nature of it, the scammy nature of the pump and dumps, and being, why would I move or reallocate some of my net worth into that? It seems just as so. I think
certainly sows the.
Sorry for the rant.
Go ahead, Connor. Oh no, you're good.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Cedric said.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just Bitcoin retail hasn't really been here for a few months now. But what I would add to that very briefly is that there are reasons to be hopeful here. I mean, the Financial Conduct Authority, which is a UK regulator, did a report looking at, who owns crypto in the UK. And they found that actually in 2025, crypto ownership fell by a third. So we now have about 5 million people who own crypto. But Bitcoin remains the most popular digital asset to own, and it remains the most recognized. And those are two big hurdles. So I think there are ways that the Bitcoin community can build upon this, because Bitcoin has far more brand recognition than any other digital asset does.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're seeing these new coins being created from people up at the top, it certainly sows a lot of distrust into the market as a whole, and we've certainly seen that over the last year. You said a third. There's a third less people in crypto in the UK. Is that what you mentioned? Which is bonkers to me. And so we're seeing the effects of that now, and I don't like it. I hope that's not the way the world is going, where politicians are going to be issuing their own coins so that they can pump their bags, and I don't like it. But we'll see how it plays out. But I will say I do love having you two guys on the show. It's an absolute treat every time I have you, Connor, and you, Cedric. So thank you both so much for joining us today. Before I let you go really quick, Connor, first, do you have any places that people want to check out more of your work, or maybe your hot takes on X? I'm sure you gained a couple fans today. What's the best place I can send them?
Well, I've got great news. It will be here on RoxomTV from next month. I'm going to have a daily show in London. That'll be starting hopefully in a few weeks.
Congrats. Well, we're pumped to have you on the team, so that's very exciting, and we'll be seeing a lot more of you. Cedric, you have a couple amazing podcasts of your own. Let our audience know where they can check them out, because they should if they haven't already.
Well, thanks for having me on as always, Hank. Connor, congratulations on the new show. That's awesome. I'll have to tune in. You can check out my show, The Bitcoin Matrix. Every week we drop a new episode, a philosophical podcast and about Bitcoin and the future of money and the effects of Bitcoin on society and culture and economics. And we do Bitcoin Center every Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. Hank's going to be on the show today talking about, the SBR and I think the White House and sort of crypto regulation. So check that every week. It's a live show where we debate Bitcoin, macro, and finance.
Amazing, gentlemen. Well, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Cedric, I'll see you in a little bit. Connor, I will be seeing you soon, my friend. And have a great week, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, guys. We're taking a quick break. We'll be right back with RoxomTV News after this. Stay tuned. All right, joining me now, we have fellow Roxom TV host and the man that Bitcoin deserves, Walker America. Walker, how are you? Happy Tuesday. What do you guys got going on in your show today? We're excited to know more.
Hank, always better after getting introduced by you. I think you're giving me too much credit, but I sure do appreciate it. We've got a fun show ahead here. I caught the tail end of your show. Looked like a great time there. Going to have Brandon Gentile, big friend of the Roxom crew, joining us here for the first part of my show. It is a 3-hour show every Tuesday, 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Then I'll be doing a little bit of ranting and news coverage on my own for a bit. Then I'll be joined by Alex Leishman. He's the CEO, CTO, and founder of River, one of the prominent Bitcoin-only exchanges. Excited to get him on. If you're a Bitcoin founder, you've got to walk and chew gum at the same time. Great guy, and really excited to get his So a lot of stuff to cover here. Everything from Strategy's latest Bitcoin buy, some 2026 price predictions from our friend Jack Mallers, Trump's family fortune growing quite rapidly thanks to Bitcoin and quote crypto, and then a lot of world news from the Greenland story to what's happening in the UK and Australia around social media bans, to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent giving some insights on what may actually be happening with the SBR and a whole lot more. It's going to be a fun show.
Oh man, it looks like you guys have a lot to cover, so everyone make sure you're staying tuned for Walker's show. You won't want to miss it. I know Brandon personally, he's awesome, so you got some heavy hitters on there, and it sounds like you got a lot to talk about, so I don't want to keep you. We're signing off here at Roxom TV News. Thanks for joining in. We'll see you all tomorrow. Enjoy your time with Walker. Walker, my friend, have a great show, and we'll see you on Thursday, my friend.
See you soon.
Cheers. Thanks, cheers. All right, gang, that's a wrap here at Roxom TV News. If you haven't already, make sure to like, follow, subscribe to Roxom TV News, and me at Hank at Roxom TV, wherever you choose to do your online scrolling. And we will be back tomorrow, Wednesday, at our normal time of 8 a.m. PST for more world news and Bitcoin madness. So thank you as always for tuning in, and I will see you boys and girls tomorrow.